Commander Du Yun stood at the main viewing window of his spaceship, watching the blue planet grow larger as they approached. His ship was the pride of the Guishan Empire's fleet, completely invisible to any known detection method. The commander smiled as he thought about how easy this mission would be. After all, humans couldn't even see his massive ship when it was right in front of their primitive telescopes. "Commander, we are entering Earth's outer orbit," Lieutenant He Rin reported from her station. She was younger than most officers of her rank, but her careful attention to detail had earned her this position. "The human satellite network is more extensive than our initial scan suggested." Du Yun turned away from the window. "Are you worried about a few pieces of metal floating in space, Lieutenant?" He walked over to the main control panel, his footsteps silent on the ship's dark floor. The entire bridge was designed to absorb all sound and light, making their ship a perfect void in space. "Not worried, sir. Just cautious." He Rin's fingers moved quickly over her holographic display. "I've counted over 3,000 active satellites. That's triple what we expected based on their technological level." The commander waved his hand dismissively. "They'd probably just like to waste resources. Remember, these are the same beings who still use combustion engines to reach orbit." He chuckled, but He Rin didn't join in. The bridge crew continued their work in silence. Their ship, the Shadow Whisper, was leading a fleet of 5 equally invisible vessels. Their mission was simple: observe Earth's military capabilities and determine if the planet posed any threat to the Empire's expansion plans. As they settled into orbit, Du Yun reviewed the mission parameters on his personal screen. The Guishan Empire had been watching Earth for the past 50 years, but always from a safe distance. This was the first close-range observation mission, made possible by their new invisibility technology. "Sir," one of the sensor operators called out, "I'm detecting some unusual movement patterns in the human satellites." Du Yun walked over to the operator's station. "Explain." "Several satellites have changed their orbits in the past hour. The changes are small, but they form a pattern I don't understand." The operator, whose name was Jinwoo, showed him the tracking display. He Rin joined them, studying the screen with intense focus. "Those movements, they almost look like they're creating a grid pattern." "Coincidence," Du Yun said firmly. "Their satellites probably need regular position adjustments. Remember your training. Humans are centuries behind us. They can barely reach their own moon." Just then, a message came in from one of the other ships in their fleet. "Commander, the Earth station they call ISS will pass within visual range in 10 minutes. Should we adjust our position?" Du Yun smiled again. This would be a perfect test of their invisibility. "No. Maintain course. Let them pass right by us. It will make an interesting story, how their astronauts flew right through our fleet without seeing a thing." The minutes ticked by as the International Space Station approached. Du Yun could see it clearly now through the view screen. A primitive construction of metal and solar panels, crawling through space like an infant taking its first steps. The station drew closer. Through the high-powered cameras, they could see the astronauts inside going about their daily tasks. One of them was looking out a window, taking pictures of Earth below. Then something unexpected happened. The astronauts stopped taking pictures of Earth and pointed their camera directly at the space between the stars where Du Yun's ship was hiding. "Impossible," Du Yun whispered. The astronaut called others to the window. Soon, 3 humans were floating there, all pointing cameras in their direction. "Sir," He Rin's voice was tense, "the satellite movements have increased. 47 satellites have now changed position. They're forming a sphere around us." Du Yun felt his confidence waver for the first time. "Show me." The main screen lit up with a diagram of their position. Sure enough, Earth's satellites were moving with purpose, creating a web of coverage around their fleet's location. "Perhaps we should move to a higher orbit," He Rin suggested quietly. "No," Du Yun said sharply. "Our invisibility is perfect. They cannot see us. These movements must be part of some routine satellite maintenance program. But even as he said it, he noticed his hands were gripping the edge of the control panel too tightly. Hours passed, and more satellites changed position. The crew grew increasingly uneasy as they watched Earth's orbital machinery dance around them in precise patterns. "Commander," Jin Woo called out, his voice shaking slightly, "you need to see this." The main screen showed a video feed from Earth's surface. A news reporter was standing in front of a large observatory. The words at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking Enigaudios. Anomaly detected in Earth orbit. Scientists puzzled by invisible objects." Du Yun felt his heart skip a beat. "Turn it off," he ordered. "Maintain position. Remember, we are invisible. There is no way their primitive technology can detect us." But as night fell over this side of Earth, something happened that made even Du Yun's unwavering confidence crack. Points of light began appearing on the surface. Hundreds, then thousands of them. Lasers, all pointing up, all pointing directly at their fleet. "Sir," Herin said softly, "I don't think they're as primitive as we thought." Du Yun stared at the web of satellites around them, at the lasers painting their position from Earth's surface, at the astronauts who were still taking pictures of their invisible ships. For the first time in his career, he felt true fear. Because if humans could see through their perfect invisibility, what else could they do? "Send word to the fleet," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell them to power up their engines. We need to report this to the Empire immediately." He paused, then added, "And Lieutenant Horin." "Yes, Commander. Next time I dismiss your concerns, remind me of this day." As the fleet prepared to leave Earth's orbit, Du Yun couldn't help but wonder what other surprises these humans might have in store. They had achieved something that should have been impossible. They had seen the invisible. And somehow that seemed more frightening than any weapon they could have discovered. The commander took one last look at the blue planet below, now sparkling with thousands of laser points marking their position. He had come here expecting to observe a primitive species. Instead, he had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous beings in the universe are the ones you underestimate. "Begin departure sequence," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. But as the engines hummed to life, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of humanity's surprises. The invisible fleet rose higher, preparing to leave Earth's orbit. But they all knew one thing for certain. They would be back. Because now the Guishan Empire had to know. How had the humans done the impossible? And more importantly, what else were they capable of? As they accelerated away from Earth, the last thing Du Yun saw was a new message being projected into space by those same lasers that had tracked them. It was simple, just 4 words, but it sent chills down his spine. "We know you're there." Dr. Songmai sat in her dimly lit office at the Korean Space Research Center, staring at her computer screen. Something wasn't right with the star data she had been collecting. She had checked her calculations 20 times, but the numbers kept telling her the same strange story. Some stars were moving in ways they shouldn't. She took another sip of her cold coffee and called her friend and colleague. "Dr. Tawan, can you come to my office? I need your eyes on this." 5 minutes later, Dr. Tawan walked in, carrying his own cup of coffee. He was shorter than Song Mei, with round glasses that kept sliding down his nose. "What's so important that it couldn't wait until morning?" he asked, trying to hide a yawn. "Look at these star patterns," Song Mai said, pointing to her screen. "See how these 3 stars seem to shift position every few hours? That's impossible. Stars don't move like that." Taiwan leaned closer to the screen, his tiredness forgotten. "Could it be a problem with the telescope?" "I thought so too at first," Song Mai replied. "But I've checked with 3 different telescopes now. They all show the same thing. Something up there is bending the light from these stars." They spent the next few hours reviewing the data. As the sun rose outside their window, they had filled 3 whiteboards with calculations and drawn countless diagrams. Neither of them had noticed that their coffee had gone completely cold. "We need to tell someone about this," Tadwan said finally. "This is too big to keep to ourselves." Song-me nodded slowly. "But who would believe us? We don't even have proof of what's causing it. We just know something is wrong with the light from these stars." Just then, Song-me's phone buzzed. It was a message from Kim Ji-ho, one of her youngest researchers. "Dr. Song-me, please come to the thermal imaging lab right away. There's something you need to see." When Song-me and Tadwan arrived at the lab, they found Ji-ho practically jumping with excitement. The young researcher's hair was messy, and dark circles under his eyes showed he had been working all night too. "Look at this." Ji-ho pointed to his screen. It showed a thermal image of what looked like empty space, but there was something odd about it. In the middle of the blackness was a shape, very faint, but definitely there. It looked like a massive ship. "What are we looking at?" Ta-won asked, adjusting his glasses. "I was calibrating our new thermal cameras last night," Ji-ho explained. "They're much more sensitive than our old ones. And I found this, a heat signature where there shouldn't be one. Something up there is giving off heat, but we can't see it with regular telescopes." Song-me felt her heart beat faster. "Ji-ho, can you overlay this thermal image with my star data?" When they combined the two sets of data, everyone in the room gasped. The strange star movements perfectly outlined the shape they could barely see in the thermal image. Something huge was up there, hiding in plain sight. "We need to call the Space Command right now," Song-me said, reaching for her phone. "And get me the numbers for every major observatory in the country. We need more eyes on this." Within hours, Korea's entire space observation network was focused on the mysterious shapes in orbit. Scientists from other countries began calling as they noticed the same patterns in their own data. Something big was happening, and Earth's scientific community was waking up to it. In the next few days, more discoveries followed quickly. A team in Japan found a way to detect gravity distortions around the invisible objects. American scientists discovered that certain radio waves seemed to bounce off something that wasn't there. Even amateur astronomers started noticing strange patterns in their telescope images. Song-me's lab became the center of a worldwide effort to understand what they were seeing. Scientists shared their data freely, working together across borders and time zones. They all knew this was too important for normal scientific competition. 1 week after Song-me's first discovery, she stood in front of a room full of military and government officials. Behind her, a large screen showed the combined data from hundreds of observations around the world. The image was clear now. A fleet of massive ships, each one bigger than any spacecraft humans had ever built. "As you can see," she explained, pointing to the screen, "they're using some kind of technology to bend light around their ships. It makes them invisible to normal sight. But they couldn't hide their heat signature, their mass, or their effect on the stars behind them. We can see them now, even if they don't know it yet." "What do you suggest we do, Dr. Song-me?" asked one of the officials. Song-me looked at Tadwan and Ji-ho, who nodded encouragingly. "I think we should let them know that their invisibility isn't working. But we should do it in a way that shows we're smart enough to see through their technology, yet peaceful enough not to use weapons." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Admiral Yoon, the head of Space Command, stood up. "I think I know how we can do that. Dr. Song-me, how precisely can we aim our ground-based lasers?" As Song-me explained the capabilities of Earth's laser networks, a plan began to take shape. They would show these invisible visitors that humans were more advanced than they had assumed, but they would do it with science rather than weapons. Later that night, as Song-me looked up at the stars from her office window, she thought about the invisible ships up there. Their visitors had probably thought they were dealing with a primitive species that would never spot them. She smiled, thinking about how surprised they must be now. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ji-ho. They had found 2 more ships hiding behind the moon. Earth's scientists were getting better at this every hour. Soon, there would be nowhere in Earth's orbit where these visitors could hide. "Welcome to Earth," Song Mai whispered to the invisible ships above. "We see you, and we have so many questions to ask." The next few days would change human history forever. But for now, Song Mai was just proud that Earth's scientists had solved what seemed like an impossible puzzle. They had proved that sometimes the best way to see something is to look for what shouldn't be there, rather than what should. And somewhere up there, she knew, some very surprised aliens were realizing that they had greatly underestimated humanity's abilities. It was a mistake they would not make again. Kim Ji-ho couldn't sleep. For 3 days straight, he had been working in his small lab at the Korean Space Research Center, trying to perfect his discovery. Empty coffee cups littered his desk, and his computer screen was the only light in the room. He was close to something big. He could feel it. Just one more try, he muttered to himself, adjusting his computer program again. His new idea was simple. Combine the heat signatures from the thermal cameras with the gravity distortion data. If he was right, it would give them the clearest picture yet of their invisible visitors. His computer beeped as it finished processing the data. Ji-ho sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. On his screen was the most detailed image anyone had ever made of the alien ships. He could see their exact shape, their size, even the spots where their engines must be. "Dr. Song Mai," he shouted into his phone. "You need to see this right now." Within an hour, his small lab was crowded with scientists and military officials. Dr. Song Mai and Dr. Tadwan stood next to Ji-ho as he explained his discovery. "See, the ships give off heat, but they also have mass," Ji-ho explained, pointing to his screen. "When we look at either one alone, the image is unclear. But when we combine them," he pressed a button, and a perfect outline of the alien fleet appeared. "It's beautiful," Dr. Song Mai whispered. The ships looked like giant arrows, sleek and powerful. Their surface seemed to ripple like water in the sunlight, bending light around them in complex patterns. Admiral Yoon stepped forward. "Can we send this data to all our tracking stations?" "Already done, sir," Ji-ho replied. "Any station with thermal cameras and gravity sensors can now see them as clearly as we can." Up in space, Commander Du-yun was having the worst day of his career. His fleet had tried to move to a higher orbit, but the human satellites followed them. They had tried hiding behind Earth's moon, but somehow the humans had spotted them there too. "Sir," Lieutenant Harin reported, "the humans are now tracking us with perfect accuracy. Their orbital stations are transmitting our exact position to their entire planet." Du-yun paced the bridge of his ship. This was impossible. The Guishan Empire's invisibility technology was perfect. No primitive species should be able to see through it. Yet somehow, these humans had done exactly that. "Show me what they're seeing," he ordered. The main screen lit up with an intercepted transmission from Earth. Du-yun's heart nearly stopped. The humans hadn't just detected them. They had mapped every detail of his ships. The image on the screen showed the fleet in perfect detail, every curve and angle clearly visible. "How?" he demanded. "How are they doing this?" "Sir," Harin said quietly, "I think we made a mistake. We focused so much on bending light that we forgot about heat and gravity. The humans, they thought differently. They looked for things we didn't think they could measure. On Earth, things were moving quickly. Every major space agency was now tracking the alien fleet. News channels worldwide showed the images of the massive ships hovering above Earth. But instead of panic, there was excitement. Humans had spotted the invisible visitors, and they had done it with science instead of weapons. Dr. Song Mai stood in the main control room of the Space Research Center, watching as more data poured in from around the world. Scientists from every country were sharing their discoveries, each one adding to their understanding of the alien ships. "Look at this," Tadwan said, pointing to a new reading. "Their engines are powering up. They might be planning to leave." Admiral Yoon nodded. "Then it's time." "Dr. Song Mai, is the laser array ready?" "Yes, sir. All stations report ready." The Admiral picked up a microphone. His voice would be broadcast to every tracking station on Earth. Begin Operation First Contact. Across the planet, powerful lasers pointed skyward. But they weren't weapons. They were tools of communication. Each laser was precisely aimed at the alien ships, ready to project a message that would be impossible to ignore. In space, Du Yun's crew watched in growing concern as thousands of lasers targeted their position. "Sir," one of his officers shouted, They're riding on our ships." The lasers were working together, using the ship's own light-bending surface as a screen. Words appeared, written in every major language of Earth. "We see you. We come in peace. Let's talk." Du Yun stared at the message glowing on his ship's hull. The humans hadn't just defeated their invisibility technology. They had turned it into a communication device. It was clever, peaceful, and just a little bit showing off. "Sir," Herin said, "what are your orders?" Du Yun was quiet for a long time. Finally, he straightened his uniform and said, "Send a message to the Empire. Tell them we've made first contact with a species far more advanced than we thought. And then open a channel to Earth. I think it's time we stopped hiding." Back on Earth, Jai-Ho watched from his lab window as the alien ships slowly became visible. Their surface rippled like a veil being lifted, revealing beautiful spacecraft that looked like they were made of liquid metal. Dr. Songmei put her hand on his shoulder. "Good work, Jai-Ho. You helped humanity take its first step into a larger universe." "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," she smiled, "we show them that humanity has many more surprises in store." This was just the beginning. Above them, the formerly invisible ships glowed in the sunlight, a testament to human ingenuity and the power of looking at problems in new ways. The day humans made aliens visible would be remembered forever as the day Earth proved it was ready for the stars. 1 month after the first contact, Admiral Yoon Da-hyun stood in the newly built International Space Diplomacy Center in Seoul. The building had been constructed in record time, its design mixing Earth and Guishan architectural styles. Through its large windows, he could see one of the alien ships hovering visibly in the sky, a constant reminder of how much the world had changed. "They're ready for you, Admiral," an aide said quietly. Admiral Yoon walked into the main conference room. On one side sat Earth's representatives, scientists, military leaders, and diplomats from various nations. On the other side sat Commander Du Yun and his team, their silvery uniforms reflecting the room's lights. Dr. Song Mei and her research team sat in the middle, acting as technical advisors for both sides. "Let's begin the third round of diplomatic talks," Admiral Yoon announced. "Commander Du Yun, I believe you have news from your empire." Du Yun stood up. He looked different now, more humble than when he had first arrived in Earth's orbit. "Yes, the Guishan Empire has officially recognized Earth as a Level 8 civilization. This is 3 levels higher than our initial assessment." Dr. Songmei couldn't help but smile. In just 1 month, humanity had jumped 3 technological levels in the Empire's classification system, simply because they had learned to look at things differently. Lieutenant Herin, who now served as the fleet's chief diplomatic officer, activated a holographic display in the center of the room. "We wish to share something with you," she said. "This is a recording from our first meeting with the Empire's High Council after you detected us." The hologram showed a large room filled with alien leaders. They watched in silence as Du Yun explained how humans had seen through their perfect invisibility. "Impossible," one council member shouted in the recording. "No Level 5 civilization could detect our ships." "Yet they did," Du Yun replied calmly. "They looked for things we never thought to hide. While we focused on bending light, they measured heat. While we celebrated our invisibility, they tracked our gravity. They saw us because they thought differently than we do." The recording ended, and Herin looked at the humans in the room. "Your discovery has changed our empire's entire approach to science. We realized we had become too fixed in our thinking." Kim Ji-ho raised his hand. The young researcher had become famous after his breakthrough in combining heat and gravity data. We have a question too. Why did you make your ships invisible in the first place? Du Yun looked embarrassed. We thought it was the perfect way to observe other civilizations. We never considered that being invisible to light didn't mean being invisible to everything. Dr. Tadwan spoke up next. We've been studying your invisibility technology. It's amazing, but we think we can help you improve it. He shared some papers with the alien delegation. If you add these modifications, you can also hide heat signatures. The Guishan representatives looked at the papers in surprise. Harin turned to Du Yun. Sir, these improvements, they're so simple. How did we miss this? Because, Du Yun said with a small smile, sometimes you need fresh eyes to see what's right in front of you. Admiral Yoon stood up again. This brings us to our proposal. Earth would like to establish a joint scientific research program with the Guishan Empire. We believe both our peoples can learn from each other. The room buzzed with excitement. Dr. Songmai watched as human and alien scientists immediately began discussing possibilities, their earlier caution forgotten in their shared love of discovery. Outside the conference room, reporters from around the world waited for news. The past month had been full of incredible changes. Countries that used to compete were now working together. Scientists shared their findings openly. The whole world had united in a way no one had thought possible. Later that evening, Dr. Songmei found Jiho in his lab, still working late as usual. What are you studying now? She asked. Jiho pointed to his screen, which showed complex equations. The Guishan shared some of their basic scientific texts with us. Their math is amazing, but they missed some simple things too. It's like they advanced so far in one direction that they forgot to look sideways. Songmin nodded. That's why this partnership is so important. We can learn from their advanced technology, and they can learn from our different way of thinking. The next day, Commander Du Yun made a historic announcement to the world. The Guishan Empire would establish its first permanent embassy on Earth, and humans would be welcome to study at the Empire's scientific academies. We came here thinking we were invisible, Du Yun said to the cameras. We thought we were studying a primitive species. Instead, we learned an important lesson about humility and innovation. Humanity showed us that true advancement comes not just from technology, but from being willing to think in new ways. As he spoke, more Guishan ships appeared in the sky, dropping their invisibility shields one by one. But this time, they weren't trying to hide. They were here as friends and partners, ready to help humanity take its first steps into the galactic community. Admiral Yoon stood with his team, watching the ships appear. Did you ever think this would be the result when you first spotted those strange star patterns? He asked Dr. Songmei. She shook her head. No, we were just doing our job, looking for answers to unusual questions. We never imagined it would lead to all this. Above them, the formerly invisible ships glowed in the sunset, their surfaces now proudly visible for all to see. They had become symbols of a new age, one where humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or military might, but the simple ability to look at the universe in different ways. What do you think they'll learn about us next? Jiho asked, still staring at the ships in wonder. I don't know, Songmai replied with a smile. But I'm sure it will surprise them. After all, that's what humans do best. The sun set on another day of this new era, and all across Earth, people looked up at the visible ships with pride and hope. The day humans made aliens visible had changed everything. But it was just the beginning of humanity's journey to the stars.